Welcome to Slouching Towards Masculinity. What does it mean to be a man in today's society? How are we defined, and how do we define ourselves? What lessons have we learned, and how do we affect others? Join me, Philip Bedwell, and guests as we discuss lifestyles and life lessons as we slouch towards masculinity together. Hello there, and welcome to this week's edition of Slouching Towards Masculinity. I am Philip Bedwell once again, and today I'm going to be interviewing Hardaker. I met Ro a few years ago when I first started my performance art career. I saw them perform a piece called Cleanse, and I was immediately struck with the physical nature of the work, but also how studied and sensitive it was, and on how many levels the work spoke to me. I was always very appreciative of the fact that it didn't have to spell out everything that it was about, and you could take what you wanted from it. It was a lot more about asking questions and giving answers. And I recently got a chance to perform with Ro and also do some research and development work with them about professional wrestling. They've started to use the materials from professional wrestling to inform their own work. And I'm always struck by how studied and how sensitive Ro is. And I was really appreciative when they agreed to give me an interview about their feelings on gender and how you are defined in this world and how you find your place in this world. As with their work, it became a lot more about asking the questions than giving answers. But to be honest, over the time where we spoke together, I found it a complete education, and I absolutely adored the conversation, and I really treasured it. So I hope you will too. Please just sit down, relax, and have a listen. Thank you. So welcome to Slouching Towards Masculinity. Very good. I almost forgot what my own show was called there. But welcome. And how are you today?
I'm great. Do you need to tell people who I am?
You can if you wish. I was going to do a front end to it as well if you want, but I mean, if you would like to tell, that is absolutely fine for me.
I can just. I'm Ro Hardaker. Thank you for inviting me on this, Phil. I've not been on a podcast for about 4 years, so
very honoured.
This is thank you.
Okay, right then. So we discussed we were going to talk about gender.
Okay.
Maybe gender roles and gender identity. Yeah. And is there any particular where you'd like to start off, or would you like me to pose you some questions, or is there anything you'd like to start with, like a general overview of where you'd like to cover?
Oh my gosh.
You're almost saying, just tell me about your whole life up until this point. No, I mean, just any way you'd like to stick a pin in it, really.
Yeah, I don't know. I think gender is a really difficult one. I think it's a very difficult subject for lots and lots of people to talk about. And I guess it's something I find very hard to talk about. And I'm a person who, I guess I feel more aware of my gender than I guess I feel that a lot of other people may feel about their gender. Like it's something that feels very present and something that affects me every day. Something I'm not constantly thinking about. I don't know how. Is that something that you feel like, or do you feel that you're able to kind of go about, and then it's something that crops up every now and then, or are you like, ooh, or like, I mean, I guess also I'm asking, like, what is gender? What are you describing? What are you asking me to talk about?
No, that's fair enough. No, I'd say for me, gender is sort of like how really the tools you use to evaluate yourself, and then when you have a good sense of self, that's how you sort of map all experiences that happen to you. So it's like what tools, what lessons, or sort of what instinctual values do you hold within yourself that when you're confronted by a certain I don't know, role or expectation that's placed upon you, how would you sort of that sort of informs how you view, like, work inside that certain role, or how you view yourself, or how you see this certain lesson to be of value to you?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Again, I guess that doesn't. I guess that doesn't resonate with me.
Okay.
Not that it's wrong. I think everyone's experience of these things is different. It just yeah. I guess I'm more just. I don't know when. I guess I don't want gender to be a big deal, and I want to be able to the world and it to not be a big deal. I want to be able to wear what I want and love who I want without there being rigid structures and like this normative hierarchy that that kind of informs, has taught us how to behave, has taught us how to please one another. So I don't want to have to encounter those things, but obviously I do every day. And I think everyone does. I think just some people, it's a lot harder to fit into those roles. And I don't think anyone fits in neatly. I think everyone makes a compromise, large or small, to be able to fit into the roles, whether that's, my dad had to wear a suit and a tie every day to work. Hated it. And for him, it was a symbol of oppression. It was a symbol of, slavery and working for someone else. So he burnt all his ties when he quit, when he retired. He burnt all his ties because it was, a symbolic kind of unleashing and getting rid of that. And I think, and I guess as gender becomes more of a topic that we think about, and as feminist and queer discourse becomes a lot more prevalent within our society, which is a massively positive thing, I think we come up against harsher policing, and we also come up against our own kind of inhibitions towards stuff like that, whether it be, ties, or other clothing, or recognizing our feelings towards others, feeling about how we can support one another. And I think there's, gosh, I feel like I'm just talking now, Phil.
No. It's actually really interesting. I've got. I was going to say now. So what you've sort of said there already is, for me, there was a couple of interesting points you raised. Instantly, the burning of the tie, and thinking, okay, the tie is a gender thing, like a man or a masculine is expected to wear the tie, but also a class thing as well. Like, gender can be very ingrained in class, like where your sex is determined, or where where your gender is determined, and then also that ties into where you sit on the class scale, what your gender should be working towards, or what's expected of them, also what's denied to them as well.
No, definitely, yeah. I think class, race, and ethnicity, ability, disability, kind of all go across this spectrum, and should kind of be understood as kind of being entangled along with gender. So yeah, of course, someone who someone who comes from wealth and identifies as queer might potentially have a much easier access into normative society because of their wealth power.
Yes.
So yeah, we have to understand these things all as kind of a conglomerate of each other. And a lot of people obviously don't get the opportunity to be able to talk or even think about these things because, I mean, if you have to work constantly your brain cannot necessarily be filled. Like your oppression and your gender depression is just that you have to continue working and you don't get to think necessarily or ever explore or feel about your gender in a way other than I am this. I am this thing that I've been told I am. I have to follow these particular rules to be able to be seen as a good version of that. Yeah.
Also, you mentioned something as well, which I think would tie into that, was where you were saying about, if changes happen, then there can be sort of a radicalization of self that can suddenly go against society norms. So you get people fearing of the change, or a group pushing against what would normally be the status quo. And then suddenly you've got a lot more questions being asked. So someone who could be just very assured in what they were or who they are suddenly goes, someone close to them sort of changes their identity. They can be fearful of that because maybe they're not so sure in themselves either. Also, the other side of that is someone that may wish to question who they are, but always feel that fear because their education or indoctrination, the way they've been brought up, they've been taught to be fearful of the other, and then suddenly you need to be sure of yourself to need to know that you're not that, and then you've got something that you can rail against and be sort of almost push away because you're just this. But then suddenly if someone goes, well, this interests you could be some of this as well, that can scare a lot of people because they can feel themselves shifting, and then where do they begin and where do they end? Suddenly ideas and values they've had so sure of themselves suddenly have changed.
No, totally. And I think two things we could talk about there. One, which I've immediately forgotten, but one is kind of the destabilizing nature of queerness, which asks us to rather than think of ourselves in set ways, think of ourselves and others and the relationships between us as not stable, and actively work towards the destabilizing of them. So rather than making assumptions about each other, allowing ourselves just to be, and not predicating how we should behave towards each other, other than we let each other behave the way we want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So sort of more like everything can be in a state of flux. Everything can be a lot more fluid and not. I think the biggest problem is with boundaries equal judgment, and with equal judgment you can get the negative aspects of character like shame or guilt. So if life is more pushed around the fact, of like, well, you can be whoever you want to be, and just having that understanding and having that conversation open, and suddenly boundaries are reduced and everyone just sort of flows along a lot more with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think also a large part of, I guess I'm thinking about education and how we educate each other and talk to each other on a really basic level about these kind of things, because you were talking about people being scared of the other, and people are scared of the other because it's not something it's something new within their realm of knowledge. The instinctual thing is to be fearful of it, and we're not taught methods to care for one another in situations. But we're also not taught, if I go on about the destabilizing nature of queerness and how we should welcome that. That's also a really scary thing, because you remove all your footholds. You say that, I'm putting my foot down to take a step forward, but I don't know what I'm going to land on. And I guess that can be quite instinctual, but it can also need help. And I think that help has to be for everyone. It's like, it's not just agency for one, it's agency for all. So yeah, I guess if I'm like, you can be whatever you want to be, that's a really hard thing to say to someone, and for them to be able to take, because they're in such a rigid system that they still will build something within that system. I guess thinking around gender, we should be thinking, well, what's the future? What is the future of this? What are possibilities that we can't even think of right now?
Yes.
And kind of like know that it's not really our place to impose them on the future. It's just we should be able to gesture towards that and say things like, I think it's kind of a really selfish thing for us to be kind of imagining what humanity could be in the future, because it could be anything. Like, it could not be here. We don't really have power, and I guess also with what's going on now is that we don't know. Like, we are constantly, like, we are fragile creatures, and we are constantly in a state of flux. So we should embrace that and find ways to live with that, rather than sticking to these really rigid footholds and going, oh no, if I stay here, I'll be safe, because something can come and sweep the rug from under you. Yeah.
Well, that is a very, very interesting point, because that's the thing, really. You know, in reality, nothing is stable, not at all, not even systems that were constructed from as long as anyone can remember. I think at the end of the day, I've almost likened it to you're climbing a mountain, or actually, I don't, because a mountain would actually assume there's an end point, and I don't think there is. But you almost have somewhere where you can put a pick, so you can stand on it. Okay, I've got this. This is part of a value that I recognize that I can either apply to myself or other people, and then you enter the next pick and the next pick, and you slowly moving forward. But then there almost comes a point where you have to know when to let go of things you've seen before. I mean, for me, if you see this in science, that a point is an absolute truth, then there's more information, or there becomes better ways of evaluating something. That absolute truth isn't absolute anymore. You realize that it was good for a point, but then extra information has superseded it. So it becomes a bigger question. It's almost like you get the question and the answer, and the question and the answer, and one evolves the other. So you're always going to see an evolution. And like you say, there comes a point where you can spend so long wondering what's happening, where you forget about, well, you're living in the now. So you need to have one eye on the fact that you need to make allowances for people. You need to allow them to live, let people live how they want, but at the same time, get on with living yourself as well.
Yeah, and I think I guess a large part of what I'm thinking about in the work that I do, it is how we can think about that in a instinctual way, rather than trying to, like, thinking about what allowing ourselves to be can do, rather than trying to explain every aspect of ourselves. Because those things are always changing, and I guess I don't ever really feel that words are enough. And I don't just mean in like a actions speak louder than words kind of way. I just mean like I guess I mean in a slightly more like primordial way, like gender multiplicity existed before language, and we shouldn't always turn to language to describe the way we feel about gender.
That's a really interesting one as well. It's I had a chat with my partner a while ago, and we were talking about people that know more than one language. And I'm saying, say with English, for instance, you may come to a point where you're trying to describe something, and you can sort of describe what you mean, but then someone who may know Italian or French or whatever other language, they know the exact word which you're looking for, and it gives them a much more, having all these different set languages, they can switch through thoughts a lot quicker, or explanations a lot quicker. They have a wider vocabulary, so almost like having, by that sort of idea, or having sort of like a wider vocabulary of gender, but without trying to label it. So it's a weird one to explain. It's like, sort of doing by deed, and then rather than just worrying that every single word has to be spoken, but knowing that the capability of being able to explore those areas is there.
Yeah. I guess two things again. I guess I said, like, I think language is still really important, but we just need to make sure that we, again, we don't think of language as just too fixed a thing, and we allow it to expand. I think there's been a really big like backlash against kind of new terms that we're using to describe gender, individuals and groups are using, and I think we should allow language to mold to what it needs to be, rather than people who like language people who want to keep the language exactly as it is are really silly, because like language is always constantly changing, and words fall in and out of fashion like all the time. Like, just allow words to change. And the other thing, which has gone out of my head, I can only ever have one thought in my head at a time. It's either one or 1,000 thoughts. So,
well, that is sorry, go on.
No, that was definitely it. I was rambling up.
No, you're not rambling at all. It's actually really interesting. It's like I like the way you're going with it. So I was going to say what you mentioned as well was about stagnation, and that sort of come up a couple of times and when you've been speaking. Like, so are there any sort of areas where you feel like now, like, you know, in sort of biological sex or physiological gender or your social gender role, do you think there are any sort of areas now that have truly, you know, from your perspective, that have truly stagnated and things that need to evolve really quickly? Or
gosh, yeah, I guess all of what needs to change would come down to the aspects of power that try to maintain a rigid system, that are unwilling to change, or when they offer change, it's done in a way to appease public sentiment to a certain level, but actually contributes to the erasure of gender multiplicity. So if we look at the kind of, over the past couple of years, there's been a call to have a third gender option on like forms and stuff, and I completely understand and recognize why that is important, and that is also something that would be highly beneficial to me as a person. But also, I don't think it goes far enough, because you just create a new option. Like, it's because like I think about non-binary identity not only as an identity. I think it's much more than that. I think it's an opportunity to kind of blow these things apart. And I guess I was just about to say the sentence. I think the easiest way to think about it is in terms of quantum theory, and then I realized that wasn't necessarily that simple. But I think it also goes back to education as well. So if we've been taught that there's a really binary system, which is male and female, or any other kind of binary system, like where you're given two options, then we're saying that actually there's a third option in the middle, which which we've deemed to be non-binary at this point, or which the power has, you know, used that term to mean a third thing. So we've got male, non-binary, female, and non-binaries seem to be this thing which is not quite either. So we exist in a kind of a middle area. We are an overlap between the two. And I'm saying that no, non-binary, it's not a spectrum. It's like, it's an explosion. It's like it's a ball of, it's like sun, it's a ball of gas. Like, male isn't at one end and females at the other end, and then we're in the middle. It's like we are everywhere, all over this, and male and female are somewhere within this, around us as well. Like, there's no end of a spectrum. Like, the spectrum is just never ending, and all over the place. And I guess that, again, going back to education, like, I guess that's why we have things like when we talk about a gender spectrum, because it's much easier for people to kind of understand things in a kind of a linear fashion, rather than just go up to them and be like, you can be everything and anything you want to be. But again, I think that goes back to like allowing and giving permission to each other and to ourselves, and like just not being a dick.
It's a great way of putting it. It's interesting you talk about education as well? Because it almost, like I was mentioning class a bit earlier on, and it, in a way, I mean, stop me if I'm wrong here, but it sort of, so for me, it's almost a difference between education and indoctrination. So in like primary schools or like or sort of schools of a lower class, it's you're not really taught critical thought, and as far as where I was brought up anyway, it's
Mm.
more you're given a textbook. You're only given one textbook. You learn the answers. You're given a test to which you recite the answers, and you're either right or wrong. There's not really so much in the fact that you're encouraged to debate or discuss or seek out other sort of theories or ideas around these thoughts. It's just you're either remembering it and repeating it, or you're wrong. And
Yeah.
I think that can sort of travel on into your work and life balance as well. You turn up for a job where you're asked to dress a certain way which conforms to your gender, and then you do your job, you don't question the boss, you get paid, which allows you to live that lifestyle and you don't deviate from it.
Yeah.
And there's very, very few opportunities where people do get the idea to question their gender and their lifestyles as well.
Mm.
Whereas, I mean, I could be wrong here, but I think if you are of a certain class, you are afforded an opportunity where you're actually told, yes, you can be whatever you want to be. And also, you usually have a safety net of money or finance that will keep you there as well. So you can afford to take a few more risks with self and your life as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with that in many ways. But I also feel like across the spectrum of class, um, we do a disservice to people of gender variance, trans people, non-binary people. Like I know many trans and gender non-conforming people who come from um, um, like a low class backgrounds, and I also know people who were kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, and come from like incredibly wealthy backgrounds, and yeah, I mean, I guess that again comes back to power, and like a person who's like working classes, not only oppressed in terms of gender, they're oppressed in their labour power, and I think those two things are kind of labour powers are very mixed up with gender, obviously. Yeah, and there was a train that my thought was riding on, but I think it's derailed. Yeah.
I was going to say, why do you think so much change has sort of come about now as well? I mean, like, you've mentioned it's happening across all sort of, I'm not going to say ends of it because there's no ends to it. It's
Yeah.
a gaseous ball, but like all different levels of class. Why do you think like so much change is sort of coming about now?
Um,
Or is it?
I think this is not as simple. It's not as simple as because of this. I think there's many things. I think it's. I mean, going back to that thing you were saying about people of a certain class being told that they can be anything, I would say that's a large. Like I was told that I could be anything I want to be, and I was kind of told that. Not necessarily in as many words, but we were given the opportunities to kind of go and be educated and think about our minds and go to university. I think a much larger portion of people over the last 30 years have had the opportunity to go to university, and maybe engage in independent thought. Not always, but maybe. And I think that's also, the vast majority of people who do go to university kind of go away from their home base and are kind of given the chance to almost reinvent themselves. And I'd say that's one. But I also think that a massive part of it is the internet, and the ability for the proliferation of information. I think, many years ago now, I was doing a project, and we had a Skype conversation with, I cannot remember her name, but she used to be an activist in a group called the Transsexual Menace, which was kind of a militant transgender group in New York, who used to kind of protect each other. But she was now a software engineer and a coder. And the talking to her was like, well, a lot of us who were trans didn't have anywhere to go and talk about how we were feeling, but we managed to seek out and find other people, and they managed to find communities. And I think at some point, people have been like, oh, hang on, we can take these communities and these identities into the real world, into the non-virtual world. So I think that's a nice part of it. Also, just the ability to educate and educate yourself has been. I think that's one thing the internet has done, is given us the opportunity to like look up things we would never be able to think about before. We can like do a random search on Wikipedia and learn something completely like something that would never have even been in an encyclopedia. And I think that means that information passes around a lot more easy. Obviously, I think there's many terrible things about the internet as well.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's just because power manifests in different. My power always manifests itself in the way it does in the internet is particularly troublesome because of the all-powerful nature of the internet itself. Yeah, I mean, those would be kind of the ones that I'd really noticed and kind of speak most to my identity. I definitely am someone who's engaged with my gender identity on the internet much way before I ever did in like a real, not that the internet's not real, but in a non-virtual way. Yeah, and then I think once that happens, you get then the proliferation into other media. People like me come to an age where they, can write about things freely and make art freely and take this into their places of work if they have a job. And so yeah, I think it's just it's kind of a relearning and of the process which colonialization tried to destroy. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, I mean, for me, yeah, definitely, I would agree with information. That's one thing that I have really got from the internet as well. That it's like anything. Once one person does it and someone else sees that it's possible,
Yeah.
then it sort of like creates a new pathway. And now that you can post something instantly online and it's spread around the world in seconds, that means that there's a lot less there's a lot more impetus on things being spread and movements happening. The one thing I would say that I have noted in the internet that can cause a problem though is that something picks up speed quickly, but then it seems to burn out a lot quicker. It's like that. It's almost like this combustion machine where it like feeds this need. So okay, that's brilliant. Oh, that's done now. And it's almost finding the want to have to spin off with something new so quickly. I wouldn't say there's less value in things, but there's the speed in which things and factions and ideas switch through just seems to move a lot quicker now. It's hard to keep the mass attention on something a lot more, or maybe that's just me with my short attention.
No, I think you're right. Everything is done to a hyper degree. Everything's done to a fast level. It's like you have to keep up, otherwise you're left behind. And in many ways, you can be forgotten. And I mean, I guess I prefer to think about things. I prefer to think about things much more slowly and kind of move more slowly and take my time over the way I feel and process thoughts and emotions. And I guess that is a large, like with gender very much being a thing about education and togetherness and what separates us as well as brings us closer together. I think there is a danger that we do move too fast and we don't take care with each other, and we don't allow each other to process thoughts and feelings and emotions, because information is key and you need to know the latest thing. But I also feel like we don't want to go the other way and be gatekeepers of knowledge, or be like trying to slow down the speed of stuff. I think
100%. Yeah, no, I agree entirely, because then that almost that reminds me of how religion was, where the only person who could read the Bible was the priest, and then all the villagers had to take them at their word. What they were saying was what the book said, So of course you can spin that any which way to sort of benefit you. When someone holds the knowledge, or indeed holds the power, you have to then entrust them with the idea that they're going to be fair and even with it. And unfortunately, human nature, a lot of that time, when you have an absolute power, it doesn't normally end well.
Yes, get the Tories out. I mean, and that goes straight back to, I mean, that's just another class system. It's a much older class system. And I guess it also falls in with what you were talking about, like being taught one thing, and that's the thing that you have to know, and you have to either get it right or get it wrong on your quiz papers and stuff. I think that fits in well with that as well. That's the same line of inquiry. It's the same power holding and maintaining knowledge. And I guess the internet is a large part of the destabilizing of that, which again is part of the destabilizing of the things that we know, which leads to the proliferation of discourse around gender identity.
I would say something as well, because I know there's a lot of mentions about getting stuck in an internet bubble and getting stuck with a thing where you're just getting confirmation bias. But another thing I've noticed as well is some people will tend to be fearful of change or fearful of asking questions because they're scared to look ignorant. And I think especially sometimes on the internet, when it's just all done, a lot of the time just done in text, not done in real time, you can say something and then be absolutely dragged over the coals where it could have just been an honest mistake. And you have to have, I don't know, that line of understanding there. I mean, admittedly now at the moment I've had to turn the picture off, but normally when I talk to people online, I like to do it face to face, even more so, not possible at the moment, but even more so I like to meet up with someone and be face to face, because then you have that kinetic sense of each other, so you can actually be and feel and give each other to breathe and have that normal rhythm of a conversation. Whereas unfortunately, like one wrong thing on the internet and 1,000 people, or I don't know how many people, leap on you, and you've got like loads of comments that go just much faster than you could ever sort of go through or respond to, and it becomes this wall of like hate or whatever, or just people, I think that's where there needs to be that level of like being willing to allow for a certain level of ignorance if it's done with honesty and educating people, because I think very rarely you're going to meet someone that is 100% matched to what your beliefs are, but you connect on enough of them that you can sort of go, okay, what you said there was offensive, or I didn't exactly agree with it, but this is why. And, I have friends like that, and there are some people that I've known where they've said one thing and then not really seen what I was trying to say, and I've had to sort of let them go. But in other ways, I've got some friends who I don't agree with all their viewpoints, but we connect on enough of them that I can be, okay, we are together here, but we separate here, but at least we recognize each other's separations.
Yeah. I think again as well that goes back to I mean, yeah, there's loads in what you just said, and yeah, I think we have to be really careful about again, I much prefer, like, so much of how we communicate is our bodies and the way our voice sounds and our expressions and our body language, and obviously that is on the internet or over the phone or text messages and stuff, like emojis don't really do the right thing. I find it really hard to communicate in those methods. I kind of like writing in long form letters or emails to people because it allows not putting pressure on people to like reply straight away. So like with some friends, I might like write to them and then like expect maybe to get a letter back like a month later. And I kind of like that because it allows you to be a bit messy with your thoughts and talk about things and then like not have that instant thing. I think like things like Twitter and stuff allow people to like straight away put a thought into text. Not necessarily something that they've thought through fully. Or in the case of like certain groups, stuff where they've been indoctrined to think something. And then they by I guess it goes back to like masculinity, or in some ways, like I'm thinking about like playing along with that role and like not questioning why you do stuff, just going along with it. Yeah, like I've actually been reading. I think it might have arrived when I saw you last. I've been reading Bret Hart's autobiography and really enjoying it. But there's a bit in it where there's a few bits in it where like he gets himself into situations. Like he goes to Puerto Rico and there's this young Puerto Rican boy who obviously like fancies Bret Hart like so much. And Bret's obviously like in the way he's writing, you can like tell that he knows that this person feels that way about him. I guess also it's like we're talking about like 30, probably 40 years ago now. So I think the world was a very different place. But the way he's writing about it, which I guess is probably like 15 years ago now, he gets really defensive about it. And it's like, I wasn't going to play that way and stuff. And it's like, I guess that's why I've been interested in wrestling in some ways, because it's like that kind of masculinity where you're going along with one thing and then like because you're then violent, you like put yourself firmly back into masculinity. So it doesn't matter what else you've done because you proved yourself to be top of that hierarchy. And I think a lot of I guess I'm thinking about that in terms of like arguments that develop over the internet or people like jumping on people on the internet. Quite a lot of the time it's I think it's done in a way to like be better than others at the heart of it, and be better in a group and then come together in a group and you can be like, oh, we sorted that out, we did that, and it kind of just based in nastiness and forming a hierarchy, having said that, I always would like to be clear on this, that there are some people, namely like radical groups, like TERFs and Radfems and other people who like when people jump on them, I'm like all for it because like their views are just prehistoric, and so wrapped up. There was like Haba and Maz at the Right Loop. I've not read it fully, but their writing is really great. I actually going through their writing has really helped me to come to terms with stuff about gender and power specifically. But they've recently written something about the inherent transphobia and racism and bigotry in UK media. And I can't remember what my point was again. Maybe I'm just saying that they would be able to much more eloquently be able to kind of articulate this. But it's so wrapped up in a one-sided view of the world and maintaining your position of power, or forming a new position of power over someone else, rather than invested in actually being like, well, hang on, you've said something wrong. Why? Also, that's a really tiring thing to do. Like, I feel like people who are othered have to resort to that form of labour all the time. and it's kind of really tiring, and a lot of other people don't have to do that. And I think that's like, I guess if people are wondering what the difference between like cis and trans people are and like why we categorize things like that, it's like some people really discreetly fit into roles and have a much easier throughway into accessing like everyday basic things like healthcare and food and jobs, and trans people don't for those reasons. Yeah.
Covered so much. Where do I go? No, I think, yeah, firstly, to the last thing you said, yeah, if I'm honest and hold my hands up, like back in the day, I wasn't really aware of my privilege so much and what I had available to me with such ease. And I think you do have to talk to a lot of people and suddenly realize stuff that you can take for granted may not be so easy for others, and being aware of that and not just trampling on so many struggles they might have to go through. I think another important thing you mentioned as well is like, yeah, people flocking together with a certain viewpoint. And I think that very much ties back into a tribal nature that unfortunately we all sort of have. And to be not even having to be the leader, but certainly being in an idea that when you have an opinion or you have a certain viewpoint, that others have your back, and then you have that safety of the others around you, and wanting just it ties into a very sort of key thing in our brain that if you step out and you're alone and you're making a point by yourself, suddenly you're vulnerable and you could be in danger. So it's against a lot of sort of like mental stuff to want to sort of stand out and go, okay, this is wrong. But I think for me, it's you realize, or I've realised in conversation with certain people, that you're just never going to reach everyone. And I agree with you. There are some groups that now and again I'll see a viewpoint and I'm just like, that's completely not for me. That's, and I just hope that someone, if they won't listen to me, that someone they will listen to has been changed, or enough conversations have happened that the changes sort of will happen somewhere eventually down the line. It's like, but so like my viewpoint may be too radical, or someone else's viewpoint might be too radical, that it won't change them. It's going to hit too many triggers in them that they'll be like, no, completely don't agree with this, against instant sort of emotional reaction, completely shut down. Yeah. But someone in their social circle may something and they go, wow, if they think that, then, oh, hang about, maybe I should be, it is okay to question this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, something else on that, though. I think when we do ostracize people, I had a job last year where I was just working in a cafe, or kind of a cafe bar, and they had these really great cakes that were made. One day I came into work and the cakes were there, and it turns out that the woman who made the cakes had been spouting some really turf stuff online, or a lot of the so the lady who owned the place had kind of stopped buying cakes off this woman, and obviously there'd been a really big backlash against this woman. What happened there is that the only people then who would talk to her and be friendly to her were people who also held these views, so she became more radicalized. And I think, we see that happening a lot as well. Just like that's the reason that, not that racism ever went away, but that racism is vocally more abhorrent and present, like with the rise of Trump and stuff. And like now it's even more okay than it has been to be an outright racist and a bigot, and feel justified for that because the group that is behind you now is larger and can also be more vocal. So yeah, I guess that again, that's how power interacts with the internet again in many ways. Like has obviously, but I also think I think we should all be a bit more radical. It's just we should all be a bit more radical left. Like,
it's a tricky one again, because like you want to be having those conversations, you want to be open to people, and you want this great sharing of information, but on the other side as well, it's a tricky one, I'd say. But yeah, you are getting, unfortunately, it does seem there is sort of more power put to people where they can now, because of the internet and stuff, have these views spread wider. And another thing I notice now and again is when someone is criticized heavily, they almost go, well, that's what I expected to happen, and if that's all you think of me and that's all you think I can be, then I'll show you, and become like the worst possible version of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, totally. And I think I mean, it's usually people who feel alienated anyway, like a sense of togetherness, no matter what that is a really powerful, life-changing experience. Unfortunately, that can be an incredibly negative thing in many other aspects of your life. Like, I think that goes on. I mean, power preys on the vulnerable to try and get more power, I guess. And I mean, that happens across any group, really. I mean, any group is kind of moving into any group. What was the quote about? I won't be a member of any group that'd have me. Is that
No, I've not heard that, but I like that.
It's a famous quote. Because like anytime we go into a group, in some ways we are becoming radicalized, because we're kind of forming an opinion with others and being in our bubble and forgetting what's outside that bubble. So I think, I don't know, just whatever group we're in, whatever group we're a part of, like empathy for each other is really important, but also so easy to forget, which I guess that goes back to how I was overjoyed to hear that you've been having a nice time waving at your neighbours and stuff, because as our worldview does become expanded out and out and out, and we can, I can Google the top of Mount Everest now and see a picture and forget that the person living 2 doors down from me might be having a really terrible time. I could do with some help that I could potentially give. We need to in some ways we need to also remember that our worlds are really big, but also remember how small they can be and how insignificant we can all be if we don't kind of help one another.
I can't add anything to that, Ro. That's perfect. Well, no, listen, I think you've absolutely covered it there. That's wonderful. I really appreciate you sharing so many thoughts and stuff today. It's been an education actually as well. I've really enjoyed it. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or is there anywhere where people can follow you, or would you not like to be followed?
Oh God. Something I'm really finding more and more is a desire to want to be anonymous.
Yes, you're not the first person to say that.
I left Facebook for 3 years ago maybe, and kind of only really go on Instagram, and I have my own website now, which I very rarely update now, and I kind of don't want to exist, and I wish we could find another way of communicating with one another on local levels. If people want to see the work I do, they can go to hardaker.co.uk, or I am at Hardaker on Instagram. But I mean, don't expect any succinct, put together well thoughts or meanings. You're probably just going to see the occasional nude photo of me. I mean, I guess having a conversation like this seems way more valuable than trying to talk to the 1,000 or so people who seem to have latched onto me on the internet for some reason. Yeah. But I don't. Yeah, I guess I was really trepidatory because I do genuinely hate talking about gender, because I guess I've always more in the past maybe 5 years I've been asked to talk about it more when people see what I wear and stuff, and I'm very grateful to be able to have a conversation and to talk about that, but also power can only present itself in other ways, which makes it really difficult to kind of want to do that kind of work anymore.
Yeah, no. And I really appreciate you doing this as well, and giving such like a reasoned sort of chat, and like, you know, not limiting. I like the way you're not limiting yourself to any one viewpoint. It's like you are trying to encompass everything, and I think that's really come across in what you've said today.
Yeah, I mean, I just really don't want to be dogmatic. I've had so much dogma like laid on me. I went to an all boys school for many years, and like I couldn't understand like why I wasn't allowed to wear dresses and stuff all the time, or why I would get taken to the school toilets to get my makeup taken off in the morning. So I guess I just don't want other people to have to put up with that kind of shit, whoever they are.
Yeah.
Like, whether you like, I think we should just pull apart some of the push at the corners of our own borders just a little bit, and just like be a bit kinder to each other and experiment a bit more with ourselves. And I will leave it at that.
That's wonderful, Ro. Thank you very much. And I'll speak to you later on. Take care, okay? Bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to Slouching Towards Masculinity with me, Philip Bedwell. You can follow me on Instagram at Philip Bedwell. That's 1 L in the Philip and 2 in the Bedwell. Or you can also visit my website at www.philipbedwell.com. Thank you.